If you're working on a large construction site, chances are the crane will be in operation almost all the time. And though it's possible for just one person to run the controls day in and day out, chances are that many of you will be needed on the ground for rigging. So I'm sure you know, proper and safe crane rigging is crucial for operating a safe work site. So it's important that everyone working with or near the crane should be properly trained for their area of responsibility. Also, a trained person should supervise and inspect the load, the rigging, and the lifting. The purpose of this video is to provide some of that training needed for working with crane rigging. You know that slings are rated for different strengths, and that of course you need to use a sling which is strong enough for the job. There are charts provided by the sling manufacturers so that you can determine what strength and thickness you need. There's also a standard series of hand signals which should be posted within the operator's site. But there is one key rule that pertains to all of the rigging procedure, and that is that you must at all times maintain absolute control of the load. The first step in planning your lift is to determine the weight of the load. Most equipment should have some kind of marking which states the weight. If you can't find this marking, it's best to get in touch with the manufacturer or distributor of the machine, and they will be able to tell you the weight. When lifting material, you must calculate the weight of the load by accurately counting the number and measuring the dimensions of the pieces. The next step is to determine the load's center of gravity. The goal is to rig the hook directly above the center of gravity. Before you hitch the load, check the hook. Be sure the safety catches are working properly. And if they are not, remove the hook and replace it before attempting the lift. When the rigging is set, do a trial lift. Take the load up just a couple of feet, not only to be sure that the slings can support the weight, but also to be sure that the load is hanging the way you want it to. If it hangs out of balance in some way, set it back down and re-hitch it. It's important to have just one appointed signaler to communicate with the crane operator, as well as with the others on the ground working with him. Each person should be in the clear from the sway of the load before giving the all-ready response for a lift. And the signaler should not order the move until getting an all-ready from each crew member. Be sure your hands and fingers are clear from any pinch points before you tell your signaler you're ready. As you can see, the key to rigging safety is teamwork. When working with more cumbersome lifts, remember to maintain absolute control of the load. If you're using a multi-leg sling, as we are in this case with the spreader bar, it's important to consult the sling charts to determine the strength of slings needed. The rule of thumb is this, that the flatter the angle of the sling with relation to the load, the less weight that sling can handle. In other words, the flatter the angle, the stronger the sling you need. Again, the hook and cable must be over the load's center of gravity. It's almost impossible to position the hoist directly above the load. So when the load is first lifted off the ground, it will swing out in one direction or another. It's important to watch out for the roll or swing, because the weight of the load can easily knock you over. And of course, if you are near a wall or a stack of material, stay out from between the load and that wall. You could be crushed if the load swings in that direction. Once the load is determined to be stable and everyone is out of the way of the swing, step back as the load is lifted. Working safely with cranes depends a lot on the training and experience of the riggers. I can't stress enough the importance of staying out from under the crane load. 1/3 of all crane-related accidents involve workers standing under the loads. Operators are trained not to lift or transport loads over workers, but it's not always possible for them to be completely sure. Many cranes are equipped with warning bells or horns that signal when a lift is overhead. Pay attention when you hear that sound. Another thing to consider when examining a load is its structural stability. Say, for example, you were going to pick up a load with flexible material, aluminum, for instance. You wouldn't pick it up at both ends, for that would cause it to yield or collapse in the middle. causing you to lose absolute control of the load. By the same token, if you're lifting a piece of equipment that has accessory parts like guardrails or handrails, you wouldn't hitch the sling to anything that could possibly give way. You need to maintain absolute control by hitching to the most secure part of the main body of the load. It's important to choose the right sling for the job. Nylon's become the material most preferred by workers, and it's easy to understand why. It's the lightest, makes it easy to carry, and it doesn't have any sharp edges that can cut your hands. Plus, it does in fact have great strength characteristics. But sometimes people have a tendency to use it when it's not advisable. Nylon is best to use on a surface that should not be marred or scratched, or with loads with no sharp edges or protrusions. Because nylon is a fabric, it's the most susceptible to cutting of all sling materials. It is also the most heat sensitive, and not just in terms of environmental heat, but to the heat caused by friction. A rigger should never tie a knot in any sling. This will weaken the sling by as much as 50%. Notice what happens when a knotted sling is tested to its extreme. The sling will break at precisely the point of distortion. The same rule holds when you nick or cut a sling. The sling will break again at the point of distortion. Wire rope is a more rugged sling material than nylon. It's better around abrasive materials and with materials with sharp corners. However, you should still take the precaution of padding any sharp corners with some material that has a high resistance to compression. Notice that you should always wear gloves when rigging with wire rope. And again, note that a wire rope which has been kinked or knotted will be substantially weakened and will break at the point of distortion. When using a chain sling, be sure that it's an alloy chain and it's rated for lifting. Usually the chain will be embossed with the letter A or the number 8 if it is of lifting grade. It's important to know when to discard a sling because of excess wear or damage. Chains with cracked links or with excessive pitting or deterioration should be repaired or discarded. There are many reasons to replace wire ropes. For instance, when there are several broken wires in any short distance, or when there's corrosion, or when the rope is compromised in any way. Regrettably, nylon slings are often used beyond their safe lifespan. They should not be used if there are snags or punctures, tears or cuts, or if there's been any heat or chemical damage. Also look for broken or worn stitching and distortions to the fittings. Many nylon slings have a red warning thread embedded in the weave. If this red is exposed, it means the sling is worn and should be thrown away. Occasionally, a sling may be worn without the red thread being exposed. So always inspect the sling before use. Round slings, which have this loose protective jacket around the nylon, are designed to protect the sling from being cut or damaged. This does work to a degree, but if you find that the jacket has been cut, you should figure that the nylon underneath has also been damaged, and the sling should be discarded. The general rule is this: if there's any doubt in the strength and the safety of a sling, don't use it. And don't ever try to improvise with unapproved equipment. And what's the best way to get a full life out of the slings and chains? Proper storage. Slings should not be subjected to deteriorating influences, and ideally should be hung above ground when not in use. In addition to choosing the right sling for the job, you also need to decide what hitch should be used and how many slings you need. Again, the general rule applies. Use the hitch and the number of slings that best maintain absolute control of the load. Sometimes it will be best to use a single leg with a choker hitch, while at other times you may want to use a basket or a double leg bridle hitch. Remember, when using more than one sling, that you need to take into account the angle of the sling to the load. A spreader bar will often be needed for longer materials to avoid a teeter-tottering effect. And at any of these times, you may want to use a tagline for additional control from the ground level. When accepting a load, again be sure to stay out from underneath it. Use a tagline if you need to guide the load, and if you have to walk with it, keep it low to the ground. Remove unnecessary blocks or other objects that might fly up when struck by the load. Keep your feet clear. And watch for the potential roll of the load and be ready to get out of the way. Don't allow yourself to be trapped next to a wall or a stack of material. Again, remember that teamwork is the key. The safe rules of rigging are important for everyone to know. Remember always to maintain absolute control of the load. Make sure the signaler knows the standard hand signals and can communicate clearly with the crew. Keep your hands clear of pinch points and never start a lift without getting the "all-ready" response from each crew member. Plan your lift by determining the exact weight of the load, the center of gravity, and the load's structural stability. Do a trial lift by lifting the load just a couple of feet off the ground. Watch out for the sway of the load. And always stay out from underneath the load. Crane rigging is one of the crucial elements to overall crane safety. It's a team effort, and everyone has a role in getting the job done successfully and safely. Know your own responsibility, and look out to see that the others on the crew know theirs as well. It could mean the difference between a safe lift and a major accident.